What is going on, guys? Welcome to your 28th C++ tutorial, and in this tutorial, as you can see, I'm going to talk to you guys about something called default arguments. So of course we're going to be building a function that takes a couple arguments, and a default argument is basically exactly what it sounds like. You know how we can have a function to calculate the area of something, and then the user would need to enter arguments like length and another value for width. Well, they can either enter the values explicitly, or we can have a default value already in that function. So let me go ahead and we'll build a really basic function here just to demonstrate this point. So let's go ahead and calculate the volume of just something, a box or something. And so we have three arguments or three parameters: int length, int width, and int height. So we can go ahead and make this function right now, and well, let's actually go ahead and make this function right now. Go ahead and copy this, and under main, make sure you're not in main when you make this. Go ahead and paste it, and to calculate the volume, in case you don't know, it's just length times width times height. So now we can go ahead and call this function cout volume, and the user can enter three values like 4, 5, and 5. So this should go ahead and print out 100 because 4 times 5 is 20, 20 times 5 is 100. So the volume of this box is 100. So alright, we have, just a regular function here with three values or three parameters that it takes, and the user goes ahead and passes in those values and it calculates it perfectly. But in order to add default arguments or default parameters, here's what you do. In your function prototype right here, instead of just having, the variable type and a variable, you can go ahead and set these equal to something automatically like 1. We'll just set them equal to 1 right now. So if a box is 1 by 1 by 1, we can go ahead and assume that, well, it's basically this. If the user doesn't enter any values explicitly, then it's going to use those default values of 1, 1, and 1. So whenever we call this function without any values, check it out. It gives us the value of 1 because a box 1 by 1 by 1 has a volume of 1. Now let's go ahead and say that the user enters a number like 5. Okay, so the user enters a number like 5 and it gives us the value of 5. But you're saying, alright, so does that function use that 5 for length, width, or height? Well, when a user enters one value and you have a function that has three default values, the computer is automatically going to assume that you meant 5 equals the first parameter, or 5 for length. So if we go ahead and run this again, we get 5. That's because it's 5 by 1 by 1. So if you go ahead and enter something like 5 and 6, the user's automatically gonna, or excuse me, the computer is gonna assume that you meant 5 for length, 6 for width, and by default height was 1. So the only thing you're really overwriting is length and width. So it's basically, the rule is this. You can have a function that has default values, and by default it's going to use those values unless the user overwrites it with values of its own. Whenever the user does overwrite it with values of its own, it's going to pass them in order of which it received them. So if it passes in one number, it's going to replace the default value for that number. If you pass in two numbers, it's going to replace the second value for that number right there. And if you just pass it in two numbers, it's going to, of course, keep that same default value of 1 for the last one. So you get 30 for your value. So, of course, I just want to point out that you can, go ahead and add 3 values if you want. But, what's the point of having default values if you're just going to have 3 parameters you're going to pass in anyways? So basically that is how you have a function that uses default arguments, in other words default parameters. And one other thing that people typically mess up, you only have to put the default value in your function prototype right here. Whenever you create the function in the function body itself down here, you don't put the values down here because you already saying, alright, if I don't explicitly pass in any values, I want to use these as defaults. So you don't need to retype it right here. So people get this wrong a lot. So don't forget to, just remember that simple rule. So now you understand the basics of having default values in your function, why they are useful, and how you can pass in a different number of functions like 6 or 6 and 5 or 6 and 5 and 7, and it would all work fine. Basically, whatever you pass in, it replaces the rest with the default values. So that's all I have for you guys for this tutorial. Hopefully you understand. If you don't, just go ahead and ask me one of the questions on my forum, thenewboston.com/forum, and I will be more than happy to answer it for you guys. So thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.